Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Truth is Stranger Than Fiction. This is Herschel36, and I would like to welcome Mr. Crow 777 back onto the show. Crow, it is 2017. What do you say to that?
I think that's questionable, but thanks for having me back.
I've been listening to a lot of your interviews recently. Fascinating stuff, especially with the stuff you've been cracking on with Jason. It is Jason from
Secrets of Saturn. His band, he has a band that does like 60s, 70s. That's Cult of Saturn, but his YouTube channel is Secrets of Saturn.
And that opened up this conversation for me personally, as I think it has done for a lot of people out there. You know, what is the fascination with the planet Saturn? And I would like to ask if we could get deeper into that conversation during the next 45 to an hour, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, we can. But to be honest, I kind of take topics like this and I try to strip them down to what seems helpful. And so while you can see the Saturnian encoding and everything from Vatican to, I mean, just about any long-lived society or organization in the world, the black cube, all these other things, I think it really helps to boil it down to brass tacks. And that's really a pretty simple conversation.
Well, why don't you kick that off?
Basically, in my view, what you're looking at with Saturn is time. It's Cronus. Of course, we have the idea floating around that the elite use it to encode some supposed golden age. And you even hear things like Saturn was the sun at that time. I don't know what you do with all that. There's no way to sort through whether that's allegory, whether they're talking about Saturn as a reference to time, whether they're trying to actually communicate that somehow that we're unaware of a sun changes. I don't know what to do with that. But basically, when we're talking about Saturn, we're talking about time. So in a way, Saturn is not only the black cube, it is the bars on this prison we live in.
Okay, so the connection between Saturn and Satan?
Sure. I mean, this is where it starts to allegorize, and I just don't think it's too helpful to go off in these directions, because you can talk to 100 people. They'll give you similar or varying versions of the idea you're about to go down to. But really what it comes down to is, if you just look back to the Greek myth of Cronus and the idea of time, and really that's, I think, the most helpful way to think about Saturn. And you can get into the whole black cube thing and all these other constructs, but in a way, the black cube is just reiterating our movement and our encapsulation in this zone of time. You know, if you look at space coordinates, it's often shown as a cube because there's 6 directions you can move in that construct. But to get back to time, it's really the overarching control system on us all. You know, it dictates that we're going to be here a certain amount of time. It dictates that every moment we're here, change will occur. It basically dictates much of the construct we live in.
Yeah, of course, time, we are absolutely under the constraint of time, aren't we? You know, 9 to 5 for general people who go into an office. They get there at 9, they leave at 5:30, and that's their day. And you work 5 days in a week of 7, and you have 2 days off.
So you've hit it right there. So what you're looking at is the people in charge have built a system that we live in. Our school, the way we work, the number of days we work, as you pointed out, is pretty constant across most Western world countries these days. And what it is a way to control human beings. You see, if we spend a third of our life sleeping and a third of our life working, that means we're basically awake for about a third of our life. And that's really a rough breakdown. It's probably not even thirds, but you get the point I'm getting at. So what you find is, well, let's take a mortgage is a good example of this construct you just pointed out. A mortgage, if you break down the word, the prefix on that word is mort, that's death. So a mortgage is a death debt. And so we become debt slavers, which is another way to control our time here. We have to work and work and work to try to get over this debt that we've incurred. And this is not the way a human being should live. You know, a human being should have time to experience life and to realize that there's something more. And really, the system that we live in now hampers that ability, and it's clearly intended by those who put it together. And that is based directly, in my view, off Saturn, the idea of Chronos, time.
That's very interesting, because obviously we live in a debt-based society from start to finish, and if anyone isn't aware, there is no inherent value in the cash system that we live within.
No.
And money is created out of nothing, came off the gold standard. Even when it was on the gold standard, I still don't believe there's any true value in it, because why do we give value to gold and silver, you know? And of course, we live in a banking system that's based on fractional reserve banking, where they just create zeros and digits out of thin air, the bankers.
Well, you illustrate the illusion here. So basically, we're all working a major portion of our life that we're not asleep, leaving us very little awake time left to ourselves. What we're working for is this thing called money. This thing called money has no inherent value. So you can begin to see the dream time, the illusion that's been spun around us, where we're giving up major portions of our existence here to chase a thing that has no inherent value, to deal with constructed debt that was just a system that was formed around us. And it's going to get worse. I mean, we are moving towards a moneyless society where credit is going to be everything. And that really kind of amplifies this idea.
That's right. Having been in Sweden, I know for a fact that Sweden is the furthest society in Europe at the moment that's heading towards this cashless society. They have one card, one credit card size data thing, you know, and it's their NHS, their healthcare card, it's their driving license, it's their bank card, it's their ID, it's everything. This one card. And banks, a major percentage of banks will not accept cash transactions anymore. Very interesting. India has ruled out certain denominations of their cash only last year, and so it goes on. And we're seeing countries that don't fit into the financial structure, places like Venezuela, have been forced into hyperinflation. And it's very, very interesting. And to move cash from one country to the next in Europe is getting increasingly more difficult. Anything over 2,000 to 3,000 euros, you know, they're specifically asking you what it's for, where it's going, where it's come from, and what you're doing with it. It is incredibly controlling at the moment.
Yeah, it's, you know, we're moving towards 1984, aren't we? In the same way I say so often that the Brave New World is basically a blueprint by the authors who hovered around the Tavistock Institute at its inception. And an animal farm demonstrates what certain ways that we are all engineered and controlled. But what you're describing is what the book 1984 put forward as kind of a forward-looking view of what this all-encompassing control could look like. And when you start to get everything down to one data collection point, one single card, you're beginning to exert ultimate control over populations.
That's right, and you'll notice that on the Swedish flag is the Rothschilds emblem, plus George Orwell, or is George Orwell's real name Eric Blair by chance?
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's just a pseudonym. Orwell's a pseudonym.
And when I wasn't aware of the Tavistock Institute before I heard you and Jason talk about it. So I've obviously gone away and I've looked into the Tavistock Institute. But what you're stating in your many interviews on your radio station, which if you haven't checked out Crow's radio station, do it. Do yourself a favour. Unless you want to stay asleep, then don't bother going there. But the Tavistock Institute has been set up to design society, has it not?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we find is, you know, all these big players, you can look back through history. You just mentioned the name of an author. These big names that created art, literature, or even the big names like Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. These are the people that really began this very extremely fascist right-wing idea that was wrapped up in psychology. And this has all been scripted. It's all been planned. And these ideas that came out of these psychologists were adopted into places, not just the Tavistock Society, but that is one of the main pushers and shakers. And they began to use every tool at their disposal to employ psychological methods that had a predictable outcome over major populations. And this is demonstrated. It's not really arguable. People can say whatever they want. We know, we can see what's happened. We can follow the document trails. As I've done on my radio show, you can pretty much illustrate that the Tavistock Institute declared war on the young generation of the 60s, and a document slipped out that basically demonstrates the language there is saying this document can never see the light of day, but everyone sitting in this group needs to, from here forward, consider that we are at war with the young generations of the 60 era, and this is what kicked off, peace, love, and drugs. And they used rock double agents, which are almost all the big rock bands you can remember. Matter of fact, all of them, to include Jim Morrison, whose father started the Vietnam War using a lie. But my point is, it worked perfectly. They drugged the living bejesus out of a generation, and this went on well into the 80s and 90s. And yeah, this is all attributable back to the psychology of Jung, Freud, others, the Frankfurt School in Germany, and I could go on and on.
Fascinating stuff, because I've been thinking about this. Clearly, we've excuse me. Growing up, I came from a mother who was Irish, father who was Scottish, both of which were Catholic, who moved from Scotland and Ireland down to London. Both went into banking and got married and had 5 children, Roman Catholic children, right? And of course, you've got that. That family was built up from the 1920s, to get married. It's an institution marriage, and to have kids and send them to school. And of course, this has all also been socially engineered. And now we're at a place where they're trying to destabilize the core family, and introduce a greater sense of homosexuality, for want of a better term, transgenderism, and they're now seemingly moving society in a completely different, or down a different path. Any truth to that, Craig?
Sure. I mean, it's de-evolution. They're trying to destroy any hope of high-minded societies developing. And over the recent few hundred years, if there is such a timeline that we can actually look at with any certainty, which is questionable, something as simple as music. Look at Bach. Look at Mozart. These are complicated, high-minded forms of music. And look what we're listening to today, rap. This is part of the social construct. And rap even taps into the whole magical spellcraft thing by using rhyme and very primitive beats to lower the consciousness. But when you get into the family unit, we can absolutely see what's happened. They're not just like in the United States where I am, the middle class is pretty much obliterated. Any unions, this country was something like 30%, 37% unionized at its height. There's a fraction of that's like 5, 6, 7% something. Not that I'm stating I'm pro-union. I'm pointing out that they engineered it one way. Now they're engineering it back. And it's basically de-evolution. But it gets much worse when you begin to break it down logically, and it's hard to talk about because a lot of people, when they hear what I'm about to say, will be totally blindsided and shocked. But even the idea of marriage and the idea of love between a man and woman in that marriage is a construct. We're not really teaching our society to love one another. We're teaching that we own and control one another. In other words, if I'm married, my primary concern is really not that my wife is happy. My primary concern is that she's faithful to me, that she holds up her side of my household. These kinds of ideas. And when you look at the ruling class, let me tell you something. There is a whole other thing going on there in terms of male-female relationships or even gender in general. You mentioned this idea to push more homosexuality and to push more transgenderism, and yet there are so many researchers now trying to demonstrate that part of the game the elites play is a transgender game. So, I mean, it really is kind of a wicked web that has been weaved.
That's right. And, the most shocking part isn't regarding the gender evolution. It's actually the fact that the love that we've been sold between man and wife was part of the social construct.
Well, sure. Not to, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, you're even wearing the ring of Saturn on your finger when you're married. And, words have meaning. And, if you follow people like the whole Luciferian crowd, they're very interested in the numerical value of words and how they associate with each other. They're very interested in words backwards. Well, the word love that we use is evil backwards, if that means anything.
Yep, you're right. And I think it's really important to recognise that to fall in love, get married, and have children, it all costs money, right? It's all part of the greater corporation. And there, in my opinion, there's a group who are responsible and own the rights to the marriage as part of the greater corporation, and also a similar group, or possibly the same group, who are responsible for the divorce of those people who got married, and if you can push people via spellcraft down one way, i.e., go get married, young couple, and then after a period of time, push them down another path, which is you're not satisfied with that marriage, go get divorced. Each time I get married, each time I get divorced, someone's making money out of it, and it's one big scam. I'm absolutely certain of it.
Well, I mean, language has meaning. Language is spellcraft. When you speak, you're implanting ideas in another person's mind. So you're creating something out of nothing. But, why do we fall in love? That's not correct, is it? Shouldn't we be rising to a thing called love as if it was compassion or some higher minded ideal? And that's not what it is. It's a bit like a sleep. We fall into sleep. We fall into love. And you can see the construct of it in the language. But to get back to the idea of marriage, first of all, I'm a free human being. Why the hell do I ever need to ask anybody for permission or a license? When I was younger, we were told, when I was a kid and my parents were of marrying age, they were told they had to get an RH factor test for their blood because there were compatibility concerns. Well, for some reason in the modern age, we don't have to do this. So you can see what's going on. For some reason, they were collecting the RH factors on everyone. And then to get into the money that's spent around it, well, look at the De Beers Corporation. They basically have a monopoly on diamonds. And why is it that the Jewish people of the world seem to have a monopoly on all the gems? You can see the construct of it, and there is no portion of it that you cannot logically break down to understand is an unhelpful system, retarding and lowering the abilities of what would be otherwise a higher-minded society.
That's right. It's refreshing to hear someone speak in such a manner, Crow, because we're as a race, as a society, especially in the West, especially the English, we're under massive mind control, and people do not realise how bad the mind control is. Right? It's very, very intense, and the fact is very, very simple. We have been manipulated. We are being manipulated, and in the future we are going to be manipulated further, and we're moving towards transgenderism, we're moving towards transhumanism, and there's lots of researchers out there who claim a lot of the leading starlights, so actors, sports people, etc., who are female are actually men, and a lot of them who are men are actually female, and you have this crossover, you've got this blend where you have models now that you are genderless, and you don't know whether they're men or female. And the ultimate goal, I believe, is to take the birthing rights out from society and place it in direct control of government. And my belief is that government is controlled by shadow entities on the back end of government. Is there any truth to that, in your opinion?
Well, sure. Governments are just corporations that are tools to higher organizations. But everything you just mentioned, go read Brave New World again. Again, the author hovered around the Tavistock Institute creation. It is a blueprint for this ultra right-wing kind of one world government push that is going on, where presumably one entity somewhere controls everything. And read it again. People have forgotten that read it in high school. The people are drugged out with a drug called Soma. There's actually a drug on the market called Soma, some kind of muscle relaxer, I think, but they control how birth happens. And you can see how this moves. And the idea of transgenderism in stars and royalty, I've had a tough time with this. While I understand it's exactly what we should see, and while I've tried to make rules so I could demonstrate it or predict it in some way, it's been very problematic for me. But nonetheless, some of the ideas of like, how do you protect that blue bloodline that we always hear about? Well, let's say, as an example, if Mick Jagger was somehow related to royalty and he was truly a man, how many women has he slept with in his life, would you imagine? So every kid that came out of that would be diluting their precious blue bloodline. And I'm repeating one of the arguments I've heard that seems to hold water for why this kind of thing might go on. On the other hand, if he was actually a female that was made transgender into a male, there's no danger of Mick Jagger going out into the world and diluting a blue bloodline. And I probably didn't explain that very well, but I will say this. When I first tried to take it apart to put rules around identifying the transgenderism that's not very visible to me alone with my naked eye, I started to notice that there are oodles and oodles of female actresses who have a first name and then a male last name, like Julia Roberts, or Ellen Barkin is an example. That's not a male name, but of course Barkin, harkens to a dog. And so then I started to realize names with the same first and last letter, like Rene Russo. And I started to try to build a set of rules for myself to try to apply, but I couldn't make it hold water 100% of the time. So, I know this is going on at some level. I just don't know how to define it in a provable way yet.
That's right. Very difficult to prove. Very, very difficult. There's some major names out there that are very suspect. And the ultimate question is, well, who cares? Does it really matter? But of course, for me, I think it does matter because it shows the level of deception that's taking place in the media. Because there was a time when I turned on the TV, don't have a TV anymore, but I turned on the TV, and when I watched something, it came out of that box, and I believed it, right? Because it was the TV that was dominating, and not the book. So you mentioned Brave New World. It was published in 1932. The author was Aldous Huxley, and there's a series of these books that can be identified as predicting the world that we're living in today. Is that not true?
It's absolutely true. I recently went back and read Animal Farm. A member of my family is still in schools teaching. And I asked, when I was in school, we had like Lord of the Flies, Animal Farm, Brave New World. And I was told, yeah, in many high schools and junior highs, these books are still available. See, the problem is when you read them as a child or as a young person, you're not given the right context. You're told that this is like a sharp-tongued lampoon of, some aspect of society. What you should be being told is that this is quite possibly real, and do you see a parallel to the actuality of the place you exist? That's what the children should be told. Is there something real here reflected in what you are reading? And that's not what they're told. And we can pretty much demonstrate that each of these people that wrote these books, 1984, Animal Farm, Brave New World, were in the sphere of influence of the upper crust, maybe not too far from the elite and royalty, hovering around the Tavistokian Institute ideas. And it's flat out, in my view, 1984 is a far look of what we may become. Animal Farm shows many of the methods they use to control us and treat us like animals, basically. And Brave New World is the blueprint on how we get there.
As Jason stated in one of your interviews with him, we're given a birth certificate, at birth, and then in England we're giving a national insurance number. That national insurance number is then traded on a stock exchange. Now, I've tried to look into this, and I've struggled to come up with some answers regarding this. But are they physically trading us as commodities on a stock exchange that we don't have access to?
Yeah, you're chattel. You're basically chattel. People can look up that word. You are a commodity. That's what it is. See, when I was young, I didn't get a social security number, is what we get in the United States, which basically becomes your everything number. I didn't get that until I was roughly 13, when I was getting my first job where I was going to have to report taxes and things. And so now in the United States, the day a baby is born, they assign the number, they get the name, they do all the things necessary to set up the straw man corporation. If you look into these things, you can demonstrate it. But it appears that there may be some backdoor ways. I mean, I'm watching people now claim you can use your birth certificate to clear all debt, and all these other kind of very weird aspects of the corporation that was set up in your name. But at the end of the day, it points you in one overarching direction, that we live in absolute control. The freedom that we think we have is an illusion. You are not a free human being. Even to get married, you've got to ask permission. And you need to start to question these things. Why do I need to ask anyone? If I love somebody or I care about somebody, I can be with them. I don't have to ask a damn soul. As a matter of fact, in the United States, if you live with them for 7 years or something, they call it common law marriage. So there was no preacher, no marriage license, none of this nonsense that we're all subjected to or supposed to subject ourselves to. And I would point out, if you're a parent and you're going to have a child, you do have the ability to say no. It may not be easy, it may be a real hassle, but you do have the ability to say, not only am I not filing my child's name into a corporation, I'm not accepting a birth certificate or a social security number, these types of things, but you need to really research it. So if you're going to go down this road, you understand there are other people who are doing this now. In the same way that I was recently in a dentist's office, and the first thing when I walked in the door, I said, you will at no time put fluoride into my mouth, into my body. And for the first time in many, many, many years of doing this, they didn't bat an eye. So my next question to them was, wow, are lots of people now coming in asking for no fluoride? And they said, yeah, quite a number. That's a huge shift. A short 5 years ago, when I had to go into the dentist and I said, you will put no fluoride in my body, it was like this fight was on. And I finally had to say, screw you. It's my body. I don't care what you think fluoride does. You're not putting it in me. And it was always this argument that ensued. I even ended up switching dentists a number of times because they would not let go of not putting fluoride into my body. And it's another facet of this system where you begin to understand there is nothing about the way we live now that you cannot examine, logically break down, and understand it as a control mechanism that is not very helpful for a higher-minded society to emerge.
That's right, but I've got to take responsibility for myself and not expect society or the system to take responsibility for me. And that is a personal decision. So like you, I've made a decision not to use fluoride. So I get toothpaste that doesn't have fluoride in it. Again, when I go to the dentist, I say I don't want any fluoride. Same with my kids, and so on and so forth. But the mother of my children doesn't agree with me. And the dentist that we use doesn't agree with me. But the conversation is starting, and people are taking more notice about things like fluoride. And fluoride is just one element of the poisons, for want of a better term, because fluoride is a poison, of how the system keeps us at a lower resonance, a lower frequency, and a lower limbic part of the brain. And one of these things is the technology. Technology, the frequency of technology, it uses a lower part of the brain, does it not? Whilst reading brings us up to a higher state of consciousness. Any truth in that?
Yeah, it's absolutely been demonstrated. Things like your television pull you, they act on your brain in the same way opiates do. And if you're a habitual TV watcher, it happens like within seconds. It's demonstrated. And then, of course, your brain waves shift more towards a sleep pattern when you're watching television. And you can imagine what this means for all the iPads and computers and everything else when this is a known thing. But to get back to the fluoride for a second, so many people want to argue against this, and yet logically you can deduce this. it wasn't too many years ago when San Diego, the city I was living in before I moved to the East Coast, began to announce they were going to put fluoride in straight into the water supplies, straight into the reservoirs. They had a kind of offhand pushback from some guy, I don't even know who he was, telling the truth that it's not good for you and that the molecule is so small that the only way you can get it back out is through reverse osmosis. So I would ask this: why is fluoride the only wonder substance in the world where dosage doesn't matter? Well, they'll just dump it into the water, and if you're a person that drinks 2 gallons of water a day, you're going to be dosed. And if you're a person who doesn't drink much, dosage just doesn't matter. You can have as much fluoride in your body as you want. Every time you take a shower, under those conditions, your body will be absorbing fluoride. If you're a person who showers twice a day, that dosage doesn't matter. You can see the falsehood in what's gone on here. And then to top it off, to get the fluoride back out of the water, you got to use reverse osmosis, we are told, because the molecule is so tiny, if that's true. But the problem is when you run your water through reverse osmosis, there's nothing left of value in your water. As a matter of fact, when I moved to the East Coast, we're on a well here. It's unfiltered, coming straight from the ground. And the first thing I noticed was that my hair darkened. And the second thing I noticed is I had to cut my fingernails every roughly 7 to 10 days. And I was astonished, thinking, what the heck? And so I asked my nephew, who had come with me from California, I said, have you noticed your nails growing? He goes, yeah, it's crazy. He's telling me I got to do it every so many days, and they're just growing like crazy. And we finally put one and one together and decided it has to be the water that's doing this. But I know that was kind of a ramble.
Not really. Water is absolutely pivotal, as we've discussed before. Body's 75% water, let's say, and water's a living microcosm, isn't it? I just put fluoride, good or bad, into Google, and Google tells me fluoride is good for teeth, and to have good teeth, good health, you need healthy teeth. Fluoride is a mineral known to be safe and effective at preventing tooth decay. There is no scientifically valid evidence to show that fluoride causes cancer, kidney disease, or other disorders. Right, so we've moved from the TV being the knower of all knowledge universally to Google being the knower of all knowledge, and Wikipedia. And I think people should be aware that just because it tells you something on the internet, that doesn't mean it's true.
No, let me jump in there. If Google tells you something, you should automatically be thinking the opposite. Let me point something out there. Maybe in an offhand way, the things they have said are true, but what they didn't say is that fluoride calcifies your pineal gland. Your pineal gland is often referred to as your third eye. In all forms of religious endeavor, your pineal gland is required to go to enlightenment or to lift up or to head towards heaven or whatever religious tradition you follow. Your pineal gland is required in that. And it has been pretty soundly demonstrated that fluoride calcifies that. And for anyone who doesn't think that's a real thing, go look at the statue in the Vatican courtyard of a pine cone. That pine cone is a metaphor for the pineal gland. Pineal has the word pine in it. It is shaped a bit like a pine cone, and a pine cone comes from an evergreen tree. There's your symbolism. These people back in the day full well knew that the higher humans among us would be utilizing what's called the third eye. In the same way, the Catholic Church, on, I forget what day it is because I'm not Catholic, is it Lent, where they smear the year-old palm ash over your pineal gland?
So that's March, April time.
So there it is, March and April in renewal, spring, which would correspond in their encoding with the sign of Aries or the head. They're smearing a year-old burnt-up palm ash over your pineal gland. And all these Catholics are lining up to get their pineal glands smeared with dead carbon, and they never question what's really going on here. You see, there is no aspect of this system that we have come up in recently that has de-evolved nearly every facet of society that we can't question. And when we begin to question it, when we begin to logically break it down, we begin to understand all we need to do is change our own minds, and we can begin to find a better way.
into Mars, rush through the atmosphere, stealing stars. Space boy, land on the moon. Do not be scared, you will be back home soon. Now take good heed, 'cause all you need is in your heart. That's where to start. 10,000 dreams, you need just one, and I'll be there when you return. Space boy, speed to the sun. Wear your sun cream just in case you might burn. Space boy, I'm on a spacesuit. Please take a spare, you know that one won't do. Now take good heed, 'cause all you need is in your heart. That's where to start. 10,000 dreams, you need just one, and I'll be there when you return. Where to start. 10,000 dreams, you need just one, and I'll be there when you. Now take good heed, 'cause all you need is in your heart. That's where to start. 10,000 dreams, you need just one, and I'll be there when you.
April the 14th is Good Friday, and Good Friday, I do believe, was the day that the story says that Jesus was crucified, and then on 17th of April you have Easter Monday, and in between that, you know, I think if I remember correctly, because I'm not a churchgoer, but doesn't Jesus rise from the dead in a 3-day period? A bit like the sun rises every morning. Any truth in that?
Well, I've done shows to kind of show what the Vatican was encoding with all that, part of what they were encoding. You know, like we get the term Passover because they were encoding, the priests who understood how the skies were working, that the sun was passing over the equator. That's how we got the word Passover. This is not what I'm saying. This is what they did to hide true important knowledge from people hidden in allegory. Easter, well, the sun rises due east at the equinox in spring, where the true first of the year should be. And of course, we had one of the popes, Gregory, I don't know, was it 13? I forget. Pope Gregory something, and Julius Caesar, we are told, helped jack up our calendar to hide these various things they encoded. See, the true first of the year is in March at the spring equinox, not in January or January, as the encoding from the Catholic Church would be. This is a whole other kind of very long, involved thing to get into.
The Jewish, don't they run on a different calendar from the Western world?
Yeah, they run on a lunar calendar, but what's interesting is when they set Easter, the Western world temporarily uses what's called a luni-solar calendar, something like that, because the sun cannot provide for where the moon will be full 1 month after the equinox, which is what sets Easter. So we get this bizarre one-day calendar called the luni-solar or the solar-luni calendar to set Easter. And of course, the Jewish faith has always been on a lunar calendar. And people need to realize that's encoded in our calendar too. The word month was actually used to be munth. coming from the moon, because the moon is the true division of a month. Actually, the moon is the true division of things like menstrual cycles and phases of our existence and life when we get to be certain ages, middle age, and people can look these things up. But that's all to do with the moon, and that's part of what's been obscured, because whatever the heavens may be that we see at night, the true thing about them is it's the real clock for this place that is ruled by time. And the only true division of our calendar is the equinoxes and the solstice. It is the only true division, and there has been endless effort to jack up our calendar, create daylight savings time, which is implemented at the equinoxes, all these efforts to screw up a human being's ability to be in sync with the environment we exist in.
Boom, that takes us to the moon, really, which is how I managed to find your work through the lunar wave, which just blew my socks off at the time. If you haven't checked out Crow's lunar wave, you know, that'd be a great thing to look at if you've got the mind that can accept what you're seeing. But the moon for me isn't what it's meant to be. And I'll tell you a little story. I was supporting Boney M in a castle in Spain at one point, and one of my great friends, Ray, was a massive Boney M fan. He asked me if I'd get him a ticket, so I got him a ticket, and we were there after I'd finished, and we were having a chat, and we were on top of a hill in a castle, so there was no roof on, and there was the moon, and he looked up and he said, "What is that?" And I looked at him and said, "Well, Ray, that's the moon. What do you mean what that is?" But now, having come across your work, every time I see that big thing in the sky, I mean, I ask myself, what is that, and what's taking place? David Icke will tell you that it's giving out frequencies to keep us into the control system. Have you had any thoughts about what the moon might be, Crow?
Yeah, I mean, of course. The problem becomes that to have that conversation is really kind of an in-depth thing, and there's so many things you got to cover. But what I kind of heard from what you just said is this. We've all been indoctrinated into a world where memorization and regurgitation is considered learning. So when your friend looked up and said, "What is that?" he had proven he had risen above memorization and regurgitation. He was no longer content to say, "I've been told that's the moon, so that's the moon." Instead, he relied on his higher human mind to say, "Wait a minute. I see this thing. There's something about it that is not jiving or not setting right with me. What is it?" And that is really where it starts. Whether you are going to continue to be the sheep from the book Animal Farm and the pigs and the dogs and the horses, or you're going to be a human being. You see, a human being does not regurgitate, does not memorize as its form of learning. And that's what most of us do, having come from the schools in the Western world. A human being questions and seeks and asks for truth. And in the simple act of asking for truth, it sets you on a path. And that path is almost certainly guaranteed to provide something for you that you did not previously understand. And it happens as it happens. I don't know if there's any rhyme or reason to it, but I think the main thing that I garnered out of what you just said is your friend proved that he was ready to stand up and start thinking like an independent human being.
Very interesting, because what happened next was me and two other friends started, for want of a better term, picking on him, saying, "Oh, come on, mate, don't be so bloody stupid," and so on and so forth. So we reinforced the learning that we had received through school. And if you don't agree with that learning, then you're different and you're made to feel different by society. And this is the very clever way that learning is constructed throughout different social groups within society. And it's part of the control system, is it not?
Yeah, the control system protects itself. And unfortunately, as long, it's a bit like the Matrix. What is it that Fishburne says to Neo there? If they're in the Matrix, they're all potentially agents. It's the same idea. As long as you accept your indoctrinated spot in this system, you will be a person who makes fun of others who are trying to think independently. Look at the whole flat Earth movement. You know, you basically end up with two rabid groups. One group saying, you stupid idiots can't figure out that we can't exist on a spinning globe. And this other group saying, you guys are freaking idiotic. We all learned in school that this is a spinning globe. So you can see different facets of the system trying to protect itself, and yet the end result is really not moving too much further down the road for the most part. It's creating animosity. And this is, of course, the system protecting itself. I would suggest that a person joining groups is going to be subject to these types of things. If you just recognize that you're a human being and you don't really need a man in a white lab coat, you don't need anything. You have a human mind and you can begin to exercise it. That's how we move forward from here, I believe, I think.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It's very interesting. And The Matrix is one of my favorite films. And there is a learning that is taking place, and that learning is actually evolving into something that is commonly termed as an awakening. And it seems that more people are starting to have these conversations, but it happens in groups, and it's a funny old place right now. This place we call planet Earth. And whether we live on a flat Earth or a round ball, I don't know. I do not have a conclusion personally regarding that conversation. But I do know this. I do know that my consciousness is in a completely different place than it was, say, 5 years ago. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because sometimes I just wish I was fast asleep again. Because it's pretty frightening, Crow, for the average Joe, which is what we are, to understand that everything we have ever been taught, from the First World War to the Second World War to the way the financial system's set up and controlled, you know, the politicians that claim to have our best interests at heart, to the media idols that I grew up with, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, you know, and it's all fake.
It is. And unfortunately, probably the people pulling the reins at the tops have pineal glands that are functioning perfectly well. It is very likely, in my view, that those people understood that sometime around the new millennium, 2000, 2009, who knows, people were going to begin to come around the corner and ascend again. And so it almost appears to me that what you're looking at is a race. They've done everything they can do to de-evolve us as we were falling. And you can show the de-evolution. You can look at music or any number of things. Look at an old handwritten letter from the 1700s, that beautiful cursive script where it's like, man, who wrote that letter? That is absolutely amazing. Look at the language. Look at the higher-minded things being expressed in the letter. Now read a letter from 2000. You can see the de-evolution that has happened. But for some reason, whatever that reason may be, somewhere around the millennium, between 2000, 2009, I'm guessing, people began to snap back out of it. Now, what's going on, it looks like the people who were well aware that all this was going to happen are pushing for control of everything under one banner before too many of us come to our senses. And for my money, it's going to be a tight damn race, man. It is late in the game. There are not nearly enough of us who have grown up to be adult human beings to be able to challenge anything. The sun is not 93 million miles away from us. A bunch of people that just heard me say that are going to roll their eyes and close down. Well, why? Variety is everything. Social engineering is built on the fact that they can limit variety. Go out and look at cars in the United States right now. My wife was just noticing the limiting variety of color in cars. It seems, and I haven't had much time to look at this yet, but a cursory glance, it looks like the colors of cars are actually being reduced to what they were some years ago. One of the main tenets of the Tavistock Institute to control large groups of people is to limit variety and then segment the society. And one of the ways you can prove this is true is with fashion. Why is it that every 10 or 20 years, the fashion of the 60s or the 80s will loop back in and become the fashion of a new particular time? because they are limiting variety. Why isn't it that every decade or every 12 or 15 years doesn't have its own unique fashion that constantly evolves into something else? You're looking at social engineering. You're looking at a thing that's already occurred being looped back into society to limit variety. So every time you roll your eyes at a person expressing an idea that is new to you in some way, you are enforcing the limiting of variety because you have been basically instituted into an institution that has taught you to memorize and regurgitate and defend that system. When in fact, every person that is a different color, a different gender than you are, a different race, a different language, a different anything than you are, to include the expressing of ideas, is adding variety into the system. The more variety that gets into this system, the more hope we have of not all being the animals in Animal Farm, basically.
That's right. Very interesting stuff. It made me think of modern day music, the different types of dance music out there that have a slight variation on the BPM, the beats per minute, right? And ultimately, it's pretty much the same formulaic stuff with some different background sounds. And then it made me think of Train Spotting, when Ewan McGregor is off the Skag. He's in a Glaswegian discotheque, and he's found ecstasy, and he's saying, look at those motherfuckers. One day there won't be men and women, they'll just be motherfuckers. Because, we're moving to a position where we're moving to a genderless society, where people will be dominated by staying inside the control system, and the control system is recording everything. When you get up, when you go to bed, it takes your pulse, it makes sure you've got enough food in the fridge, and you are completely and utterly immersed within the matrix. That's where we're heading.
Yeah, there are a lot of people. Let me tell you something. When I first posted the lunar wave footage in 2013, I'd had it for about, I don't know, a year or something. I held on to it before I put it up on YouTube. When I finally put it up on YouTube, I was soundly attacked for roughly a year and a half until I filmed the lunar wave again. And then the attack shifted from I had faked it to I had definitely faked it because I was still the only person who had ever filmed it. And then eventually Gustav in Germany got a version of it, and then other people filmed it, at which point the attack slowly over time petered off. Well, now look at what I'm talking about on my radio show, the things that I'm saying about space, the things I'm saying about what NASA has done, which is basically lied to us from the outset. You know, an organization of space agencies in every country put together to ensure we know nothing about where we exist. And yet the conversation has changed. The attacks were rampant when I first put up the lunar wave, and I was questioning, what is the moon? Now, these years forward, and I'm questioning everything about space, sun, moon, earth, all of it, and what NASA has lied about. And there are very few people that even have the guts to come around and do a full frontal attack now. And that is because so many people have decided, I'm going to consider this. I'm going to look into this. Something does not feel right here, so I will no longer shout it down, but I will examine it.
Well, the truth of the matter is, when I listened to the conversation regarding space, it was genius. It made so much sense. And the fact that the Chinese currently are on the moon, apparently, and the fact there's no mention of it in Western society, you know, if we've got back to the moon, that says quite a lot. And I assume the Western media are not publicising it because the Chinese are doing such a bad job at replicating the moon landing, because they just don't have the same skills as the Jewish guys in Hollywood. And the other nail in that particular coffin, it clearly is SpaceX and Richard Branson. He's been trying to get to the moon for over 10 years with billions and billions of dollars in his budget, whilst the Apollo mission got there in 3 months. Doesn't make any sense. It's just BS.
It's all BS. Nobody's been above what we call low Earth orbit. Space does not even resemble the image that has been planted in your mind by Jules Verne way back in the Victorian age, to Star Trek in the 60s, to Star Wars in the 70s. All these socially constructed, media-defined implants that put the expectation and image of what space is in your mind. None of it. And, we just did 2 episodes on space on crow777radio.com, and I was going to leave it at that, but we have had such an outpouring, and I mean a legitimate onslaught of people saying, please do more, please, cover this further. So Jason and I are going to get back together to do the trifecta. We're going to do show number 3, and we are going to absolutely gut the moon landings from Apollo and NASA, and we're going to leave those rotten guts on the deck, because the truth is, from the outset, when they told this lie, they had created a thing that was going to have to be maintained to the end of time. The media has always lied to us about how many people were suspicious about the moon landings. In the modern era, there are so many people who do not accept the moon landings that National Geographic is now making fun of them on the cover of an episode of one of its editions something like a year ago. I forget the edition. My point is this. There are a hell of a lot of people who are no longer fooled, and I'm basically going to pull straight from the Tavistock playbook, and I'm going to use repetition. We've done 3 shows pulling the entrails out of the space lie, and we're going to end up on the 3rd episode here by just gutting the nonsense of the moon landing, because as I think I have demonstrated rather convincingly, where no man has ever gone before is the moon. And I don't even think they could if they had every bit of technology they could dream for. There is some barrier that we, up around low Earth orbit, whatever that might be, in our atmosphere that prevents us from going into space.
That would lead me to the next logical question. If they haven't been to the moon, they haven't landed on the moon, why is that? As you say, is there the Van Allen radiation belt? Well, what the hell is Van Allen radiation belt? I don't know. No, I've never seen it. It's just another concept. All these things are just concepts. Gravity on this planet is a concept, nothing more. It's a theory. But could it be possible, if we're dealing with theories, could it be possible to have the theory that they can't land on the moon because there's nothing to land on?
Yeah, that's kind of the view I take. It's not a rock in space. It's not a rock in orbit. I do not accept the orbital models of any solar system model we've seen. It seems to emanate its own light, and it seems to play some kind of a control mechanism part, and almost as a counterpart to the sun. Almost, I don't even know how to describe it yet. We don't have the language. Maybe almost in the way a battery would have the sun as the positive and the moon as the negative poles of a battery in some way. But there is some kind of a control system seemingly connected to that clock in the sky called the sun and the moon. Those are the true clocks for this place. And yet they seem to be some sort of a construct.
So, fascinating stuff. It's as you say, it's a mind rape. Okay.
It is. It's a total mind rape. There's nobody here with virgin mind, I'm sorry to say.
That's right. And I mean, what scares me the most is that every single thought, good and bad, has been, kind of programmed into me. But I don't want to come away from the moon just yet. And the sun. Oh, what a mind! What a head fuck! Oh, sorry for swearing, ladies and gentlemen, but this stuff is just cutting. This is cutting, the sun, the moon, the whole system of the stars. That's our whole society has been based on that. Religion, the education system, and it's so deep and so complex. Brings me back to Saturn. No, is Saturn the representation of Satan?
Yeah, I mean, in allegorical ways, sure it is. I mean, it can be demonstrated, and you can bring it back to the cube. You can, these supposed images that NASA provides with a Star of David shape or the cube shape. People need to realize there are no real images of anything in space. Nothing has ever been to what we call space, and space is misdescribed. I've even gone so far in my research as to say it almost seems like it's liquid of some kind. I did defocusing tests. I filmed the lunar wave. I did all these other things that really point to all the major religions of the world having it right, that there is some kind of a thing like a firmament, some division up there that separates our atmosphere from some kind of liquid. How you demonstrate this 100%, I'm not there yet. But nonetheless, I turned after looking across all these religions, because that was not enough for me, and I finally settled on the JFK speech, "We are going to the moon." And I said, if this idea can hold water, then I should see endless water references in the JFK "We're going to the moon" speech. And of course, it is nothing but maritime language. We set sail on this sea to chart a new course on this ocean. Just language like this. Everything about this world we live in is based on a maritime idea. The law that is implemented is a version of admiralty or maritime or pirates law. The language in all the Western legal system is encoded with this maritime idea. And we can even go into popular culture. Here's one. Everybody listening, go look up the first verse of the Beatles song Yellow Submarine. You tell me, what the hell are they talking about? Words have meaning, and if you simply take those words of that first verse at face value, what are they telling you?
Just trying to pull up the lyrics for the Yellow Submarine. We all live in the Yellow Submarine. You know, it was one of their big hits. Wow, there's so much there. It's unbelievable. But you're right. We live in a system that's based on maritime law, because the people who run the system, have created the system, are actually pirates. And I ask myself when I'm listening to you speak, if we live under this thing called the firmament, which is written in the Bible, okay, that leads me to question, well, therefore, is the Bible real, or is it just man-made? If we do live underneath some form of glass or structure, what's beyond it? Are we are we the secret lost city of Atlantis? We're underneath the sea.
These are hard things to know. When I was in my, 20s, late 20s, early 30s, I had always researched religion since I was very young, and I'd always questioned almost every facet of our existence since I was very young. I was one of these people who just wouldn't go along to get along. Even when I went in the military, I did everything I could to subvert the system to do what I thought I should be doing. But to get back to it, I don't even remember the source. I was reading an account of a very old writing, which I no longer remember even what the source was, where the claim was that every major religion, the doctrines that are put forth, have 7 levels of meaning, and that the surface level is primarily what people are taught, and it's very unhelpful in a way, but it's meant to be unhelpful because it's what wakes people up to understanding there are deeper meanings to be had. And so while I was not willing to base the idea of space being water solely on 4 or 5 major religions all echoing the same idea, I was more than willing to do it when I combined it with my telescopic research and then the language that I speak.
Boom. So in the town where I was born lived a man who sailed the sea, and he told us of his life in the land of submarines. So we sailed up to the sun till we found a sea of green, and we lived beneath the waves in our yellow submarine. And as we both know, the Beatles were far more than just a bunch of 4 lads from Liverpool who made it lucky. They were there and they were doing a job, and they were absolutely controlled by the system. Is that not true, Crow?
They were the vanguard of the war that was being declared on the young generation of the 60s. And for my money, that's one of the most successful wars anyone can look at. They invented so many green movements, alien movements, drug culture, music culture. All of it was created by the Tavistock Institute or institutions like it, and institutions like the CIA. The CIA infiltrated universities where they manufactured LSD, then they wove the drug they manufactured at the university level back into the culture they had created, and they drugged the living lights out of an entire generation, and they removed them from the equation as being a generation that could have mattered. A generation that wanted peace and love, that wanted a better existence, ended up being what George Harrison called a bunch of spotty teenagers all drugged out on LSD.
That's right, and we're still coming down from the high, to be fair. And anyone who claims to me that JFK was the last true president, You have got to be joking. And I know friends of mine who've made careers out of the JFK assassination, but the Kennedys are way up there in the master plan. They're one of the key families. And JFK, if he's telling me that we're going to the moon with references to the sea, he's nothing more than yet another puppet on the stage we call politics, or otherwise known as Hollywood. That is correct, isn't it, Croak?
Well, I mean, come on. JFK made that speech when he had absolutely no basis in reality to make the speech. We hadn't even been to space. We had no foundational resource to make the statement he made at the time he made it. But that sets aside the fact, look at the recent election we just had. Did you know that people are now showing that Hillary and Trump come from a similar Scottish kind of royal bloodline? The same kind of family tree. Many people have done research that shows all but, 2 or 3 presidents can be shown to be directly related to the royal houses of Europe and Britain. It's a charade. We're looking at corporations. See, corporations were created to enforce the system we exist in. The bane of our existence got teeth the day the first corporations were created, and to some accounts claim that the first corporations were meant to protect people of African descent. And in the same year that those corporations were supposedly put together to protect these people, more corporations in the way we would recognize them were created. So you can see, if you even go back and research that, what has become of us all.
That's right. It's so sad to wake up. It's for me, it's so heartbreaking to realize that it's all a scam from start to finish, and there are individuals pulling the strings. And you're absolutely right. People tell me, right, on one day I get a guy saying, oh, that Trump is going to cause the Third World War. A really intelligent friend of mine called Sean, and I looked at him and said, come on, Sean, you do realise it's all part of the script. And then the other person saying, thank goodness Hillary didn't get in, because Hillary blah 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 blah. And so it goes on, and you have this division. There's always division within society. It doesn't matter whether Hillary, Trump, or a Bush gets back in. It's all part of the construct, and they're just running the job or playing the role of a CEO of a corporation.
Well, not even that, really. They're a low-level corporation, you see, because Washington, D.C., you can go look at the incorporation papers of Washington, D.C., and who does a corporation serve? Well, a corporation serves 2 entities. Its shareholders and its board of directors. It doesn't serve the people. All of Washington, D.C. was incorporated in, I don't even remember the date now, 18 something, I don't know when. Anyone can go look this up. These are just corporations put in place to be pawns on the larger chessboard by, royal families, banking cartels. Who the heck knows for sure? We love to say Rothschild, we love to say Rockefeller, but really you can look at places like the Black Venetian royalty. There's a list of names very few people will be familiar with, and those are some of the earliest banking cartels in existence and attributed to be paralleled to Tavistock and all these other places. My point would be this. We've hit a point where there's lots of us who basically have the magic sunglasses from the movie They Live. But you see, the magic sunglasses aren't magic anything. It's just human beings who grew up. It's human beings acting like adult human beings, not giving a damn if they say something and all these other people try to shout them down. That no longer matters to this group of people, because they've come to understand that the people shouting them down are completely and utterly without the glasses they need so badly. That's where we are. If enough of us are willing to take a fresh look and to take the first verse of a Beatles song, something that simple, and say, what was actually being said here? Was this random, or did this mean something? And then understanding that language at its base has meaning. We all got to start somewhere, and the time is now. The time is now to stop shouting down people with a different point of view, a different religion, a different anything, and embrace that variety and start to stand up and be the higher-minded human that we can all be.
Well, fantastic. And I must admit that I very much enjoy having these chats that we have every few months. Personally, it's inspiring, so thank you for that. and I know that on my YouTube channel, on my show, you are very, very popular, and people are, you know, I get more comments on your stuff than anyone else's. I get more views, and you know, you're very controversial. You know, some people think you're a nut, and other people think you're a genius. And I guess that's what happens when you start to step outside of the control system and see life for what it is, rather than pretending to understand life for what it isn't. But we are coming to the end of this show. We've just gone over an hour, Crow. You do have two fantastic interviews with Jason from The Secrets of Saturn that are already on YouTube, with the second hour on Crow777radio.com. And anyone listening to that, you know, it's $5 a month or something. It's definitely worth a very small investment. And I assume, Crow, that you're getting into a position where that revenue can help you grow the radio station. No?
Yeah, what's going to happen here is I'm going to be moving to completely privately held stuff to get out from under Google's thumbs. Few people realize right now on my YouTube channel, I lose usually more than 50% of my subscribers in a month. This month, I think I looked just this morning, I've lost 600 subs, and yet my channel is still growing. This is the game that is being played by Google, who really doesn't want people like me talking for whatever reason. What Crow 777 Radio represents is a privately held website where Google can go kiss my ass. They can't tell me anything about it. They've already blacklisted my email from Crow 777 Radio, but when I get the new website up, everything will be 100% private, me, and held by me and some technical black hats who know how to defend the place, and that is going to be the goal. And so for the second hour, people subscribe for $5 a month. Right now, I think I have 40 shows, which means that's 80 hours of content. And it seems like with most things, the further I got into doing the show, the better it got. We kind of found our stride, even to the point where there's shows where I just do it solo. But this next show with Jason is probably going to be a barn burner, because we are going to just eviscerate the moon landings. We're not going to be nice guys about this anymore, because the people who lied to us are not nice guys, and they will maintain this lie till the end of time. We don't give them any quarter. We go straight in, straight for the jugular, to point out that any individual that wants to look at the things we're talking about can come to the conclusion that the most unimaginable lie in a scale that is beyond belief was perpetrated on an entire world population.
They did it very cleverly, very manipulatively, and they're doing it for a reason. And the reason is yet to be understood. However, I agree with you. These people are not good people. And to be honest with you, I question whether that group of human is actually working at the same level as the normal person. I think they have different information, and I think they're probably and arguably a different breed of being on this planet.
Yeah, of course they are. If any of the things we have talked about have any ground to stand on, you're probably looking at a group of human beings that were complicit in de-evolving through social engineering the majority of the world. These people did not get de-evolved. These people had functioning pituitary glands. These people did not drink fluoride or go to the dentist and get fluoride put in their mouth or mercury put in their mouth. They did not go to Stop and Shop or Albertsons or commercial food centers to buy degraded foodstuffs. These people lived a cut above. And this whole time that the most of us were being de-evolved, they were going the other way. They were getting more ability, and probably it is very likely that they're almost a bit like a different species. But there is one key difference. They're not very nice people. And either in this world, an altruistic idea matters or it does not. I choose to believe, and I choose to accept that altruism matters, that doing things because it is right and because it is justified is among the most important things we can do. The people we are speaking about, that does not matter. They will break any rule. They will implement any law, legal or not. They will go to any length to ensure that they continue to hold power and have all the best of everything. And in my view, that will be their downfall.
That's right. Selfless concern for the well-being of others is the one thing that sets us aside and actually, you know, from my own personal perspective, has a massive influence on the well-being of myself, my family, and raising up the standard of living if I have good relationships around me. Now, wrapping this up, Crow, I'm guessing you're a musician at some level, or you were a musician. I know you at some point you were. You have 2 tracks that you use over and over again. One of them is using a triplet bass riff, and it's fantastic. And I wanted to just ask you very quickly about music and the music that you use for your show.
Okay, a lot of people ask me. This is a free. I have permission to use this rights free because of one of the people who run the ads for me on YouTube. The reason I have those people is because they protect me from Google. As most people know, when Google does something to you, you have no recourse. The people that run my ads and take a % of the revenue act as a shield between me and Google. So that's why I have copyrights use of this music. It is called E.S. Crosses 2 by a man named Nicholas Alstrom. And that's about what I can tell you about that track.
Cool, love it. I really enjoy the music, love the work, love the content. Not sure I'm enjoying waking up too much. It's pretty scary out there for a small child like me on this thing we call planet Earth, hurtling through the universe at a rate that we can't even imagine. I'm not sure where we're hurtling to, Crow, but apparently, after the Big Bang, this thing called the universe was created, and here we are, sitting in the middle of nowhere, doing very little, very insignificant, so don't worry about it. But Crow 777, thank you so much for your time. It's been illuminating.
Thanks so much, and best wishes from the United States.